Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Day in History, our nightly look back at a specific day in history, where we take a look back at the events of that day, the historic context in which they took place, and some people that were born on that day, and some people that died on that day. If you have not yet, please hit the subscribe button, the bell notification icon to be alerted anytime I post new content, and tell a friend. And without any further ado, this day in history, April the 2nd. And on this day in 1917, President Wilson asked for a declaration of war against Germany. Wilson had campaigned in 1916 and won on the message of "He kept us out of war." But in the late months of 1916 and the early months of 1917, Germany announced a policy of unrestricted warfare against vessels in the Atlantic using their U-boats, and the discovery of the Zimmermann telegram, which encouraged Mexico to join forces with Germany and invade the United States and take back parts of the Southwest, led Wilson and his cabinet to conclude they had no other option but to declare war on Germany. And on this day, Wilson went to Congress and asked for a declaration of war, as the Constitution prescribes how war is to be fought. The President goes to the Congress, asks for a declaration of war, and the Congress votes on it. He asked for a draft, the ability to raise taxes to fund the war, and money to loan to allied countries, and increased agricultural and manufacturing production. Congress would pass this declaration of war on April 6, 1917, with a very strong bipartisan majority. An interesting note about that vote: the first female ever elected to the House of Representatives was a young congresswoman from the state of Montana, and she would vote against the war, and she would end up that vote would end up costing her seat in Congress. She would again be elected to Congress in the 40s and would be serving when President uh, Roosevelt would ask for a declaration of war against Japan, and she voted against it as well. She dedicated her life to pacifism and peace. And whether you agree or disagree with her vote on the World War I referendum or two, you have to admire the courage that she knew that this vote would cost her seat, and the perseverance to come back years later to Congress and have the same strong-held position. Births that occurred on this day. Rodney King was born in 1965 in Sacramento, California. Mr. King was a victim of police brutality. In the early morning hours of March 3rd, 1991, King and a friend were driving in a car on the Los Angeles freeway. They were observed by the Los Angeles Police Department and California Highway Patrol. There was a stop that was tried to be initiated. King fled because he had been drinking and driving, and he feared that this would violate his parole and send him back to prison on an earlier charge. Once the chase ended, and the police approached the car, the police claimed that they saw Mr. King trying to reach for a weapon, and the police brutally beat Mr. King. Um, a man on a nearby balcony happened to have a camcorder and recorded the incident. He would show the footage to the television station KTLA, which would air the footage. It sparked outrage in the African American community in Los Angeles, which for years had alleged police brutality at the hands of the Los Angeles Police Department against African Americans in the city. The 4 officers involved in the beating would ultimately be charged in state court. And in that case, they would be acquitted. And that acquittal was very controversial. It would result in riots in the city of Los Angeles that were not quashed until the California National Guard, assisted by the United States Army and Marine Corps, restored order after 6 days. In 1993, the federal government would charge the 4 officers in a civil rights case. 2 of the officers were found guilty of violating King's civil rights and were sentenced to prison. 2 of the officers were acquitted. The city would award Mr. King $3.8 million in damages. King tragically would die in a drowning accident in 2012. The coroner ultimately concluded that a heart condition was named as the likely culprit in the drowning. Some deaths that occurred on this day. In 2005, at the age of 84 in Vatican City, Pope St. John Paul II died. Originally, he was born Karol Wojtyła in Krakow, Poland. And he would go on to become a clergyman in the Roman Catholic Church. And in 1978, would be elected by the College of Cardinals as Pope, and would have the second longest reign in the modern era. He is one of the most well-traveled popes in history, and he was the first non-Italian pope since the 16th century. He is known for his strong stand against communism, his commitment to the right to life, not only on the issue of abortion, but as well as the death penalty. Famously, one time he asked the governor of Missouri to spare the life of a man on death row. He also was the founder of World Youth Day. He was the last pope to be a pope in a year with 3 popes. His predecessor, John Paul I, died 33 days into his reign as pope. He was very open in his relationship with the United States. Him and Ronald Reagan had a great relationship, especially with their stand against the Soviet Union. And his funeral had a lot of world leaders attend it, including non-Roman Catholic politicians, including President George W. Bush, and a number of prominent U.S. Catholic politicians as well. Interestingly enough, had President George W. Bush lost the 2004 election, a Roman Catholic would have been president at the time of the Pope's death, and that would have been John Kerry. He's obviously one of the most influential leaders of the late 20th century, and his effects are still felt today. Of course, after his papacy would be Pope Benedict, who would resign the papacy, and the current pope is Pope Francis, both of whom are non-Italian popes, and of course Pope Francis is a non-European pope, being born in Argentina. So that is some interesting chronological there. I will see you all tomorrow. Have a good night.